antivirals, we would be able to return to pretty much endemic levels, hopefully by next summer.
The World Health Organization says the Omicron variant is now present in at least 57 countries. The global agency is urging countries to act fast in responding to the threat of this new variant.
The steps countries take today and in the coming days and weeks will determine how Omicron unfolds. If countries wait until their hospitals start to fill up, it's too late. Don't wait. Act now.
The Supreme Court declared as unconstitutional two portions of the anti-terror law, but the petitioners are hopeful that the other concerns that they raised will be addressed by a full decision of the High Court. How will the law safeguard human rights and basic freedoms? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. I'm Robbie Alampay. Also with us from Manila, Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. She's joining us online. And Ed Lingao of One News, who's with me here in Mandaluyong. Chiefs, good evening.
Good evening.
Happy Thursday.
Thursday.
Before we get to the anti-terror law, we will get to that. We will also get to COVID matters later on. Pero Ami, anong linalatag niyo para bukas?
Sa COVID muna, some good news. Sabi ng Pfizer, yung kanyang booster shot, mukhang it works against the Omicron variant. No?
At saka,
maganda yun, dahil marami dito sa atin ang Pfizer na ngayon.
at saka parang dumadagdag yung, medyo may caution pa rin, di ba? Pero dumadagdag yung mga findings na baka naman kaya.
Not as serious in terms of symptoms as earlier feared. So, yes, more infectious.
We have to wait at least 2 weeks. We have to wait pa.
Yeah, but even WHO... Yeah, but even the WHO already said na, yes, it's more infectious, but mukhang hindi siya kasing critical in terms of symptoms.
Yes.
Sige. But anyway, malaki-laki yung balita ngayon and it looks like it's going to be a continuing story. Hindi pa tapos ang usapan. So let's begin tonight with what happened with the Supreme Court and the anti-terror law. Let's bring in former Integrated Bar of the Philippines President, Atty. Domingo Egon CAYOSA. Good evening, Atty. CAYOSA.
Good evening, Attorney.
Magandang gabi, sir.
Good evening, Ami, Ed, and Robbie. Good evening to everyone.
Atty. CAYOSA, IBP was a petitioner here. Now, over the course of the day, some people have been calling it a partial victory. Government is also claiming it as victory. They're saying 58 out of 60 provisions. Constitutional naman pala yung on balance, on balance, how do you appreciate it?
Well, we find it a very limited victory for the petitioners. Unfortunately, the major provisions of the law, which we thought and we sought to be unconstitutional, hindi naman dineclare unconstitutional daw ng Supreme Court. I say daw because we are only reacting to what is publicly announced by the PIO of the Supreme Court. We have read the complete decision, including the concurring and dissenting opinions.
Yes, sir. Pero sir, you characterize it as a very limited victory. When you put it that way, kasi it almost sounds like a defeat. Kasi if you look at everything in balance, the major provisions that were being questioned were never touched by the Supreme Court. Section 29 on warrantless arrest. Section 25 on designation, ginala lang doon yung supranational jurisdictions. Section 4, yung ginala lang doon yung proviso on rallies and dissenters and all that. But the general definition of terrorism still remains. Para lang hindi nakakalito sa mga tao. Ano talaga assessment natin? Is it kanino pumanig bale ang Korte Suprema?
Well, I would say the decision as given in brief to us is in favor of government. Titignan natin yung dalawang dineclare na unconstitutional. Of course, they're very important, but not as important as the other provisions that were questioned by the 37 petitioners. Well, as far as standing is concerned, we're also thankful na hindi naman tinechnical na walang standing because that is also a possibility. So, kinonsider naman ang petition, it was decided on the merits.
Okay.
So ano yung pinakamalaking issue ninyo doon na kumbaga yung pinakamalaking defeat nyo kasi the human rights groups are pointing out particularly to that 24 days of detention, no?
That's one.
Opinion.
That's one. The 24 days of detention without being charged in court. The other one, which is very glaring, is that the law gives the Anti-Terrorism Council, an executive branch of government, the power to authorize arrests, which under the Constitution and jurisprudence is reserved to the courts. The third one, which is very basic, is the definition of what is a terroristic act under Section 4. We find those very vague, unlike other anti-terrorism laws, which have predicate crimes like murder, homicide, arson, etc. Dito, any act is considered, if the intention is to create havoc or sow fear among the populace. So yung intention, it's largely within the imagination of the law enforcer, hindi well-defined. So ito yung sa tingin namin napaka-importante, pati ho yung right to bail, because there's a provision there that denies the right to bail, even if the penalty is not life imprisonment. So, to our mind, these are the more controversial and more patently unconstitutional provisions. Unfortunately, mukhang hindi kinatigan ng Supreme Court ang mga petitioners dito.
Attorney, you say...
Are you going to appeal? Are you going to file an MR?
Well, we will wait for the whole decision, including the concurring and dissenting opinions, for us to make a wise and prudent decision whether or not to send an MR to the Supreme Court.
In any case, Attorney, the fact that lawyers are already talking about a potential MR speaks to the fact that, nobody's closing the books here. And one of the things that I see a lot of lawyers pointing out is, one, there was basis to do a facial challenge, meaning kahit wala pa yung pwede na natin i-challenge yan. On the other hand, it says it also lays open not only the possibility, but the inevitability of as-applied challenges. No? Once meron ng mga potential violations. So speak to that. I mean, what is that really telling us, and what avenues are realistic to take once the law is applied?
Well, the law has been applied since the time it came into force. The Supreme Court never issued an injunction or a temporary restraining order. So it has always been applied. But you're correct. One option is to go for an MR. Also, this will also be considered depending on the actual voting and the specific issues. Kasi kung unanimous naman mga yan, medyo suntok sa buwan yung mag-MR pa. But if it is a divided court, and I think based on what is publicly declared, mukhang may mga dissenting opinions. And it is also very helpful for us to see what those opinions are, what is the basis for the majority to declare this not unconstitutional, and what's the basis for the dissenters to say they are unconstitutional. Para sa ganun, maaari namin gamitin, susugan yun. The other one also is some members of the Supreme Court will be retiring by next year. So there will be new faces in the Supreme Court. We hope that we will get better chances if there are new members of the Supreme Court. The other one also is the Supreme Court historically has changed its mind on some important issues when there are MRs brought before it.
Yes, sir. Pero sir, some of the petitioners said that they are hopeful that yung paglabas ng final decision, I mean the decision itself with the explanations, would address their concerns, their other concerns na hindi na-address doon sa very brief statement na nilabas ng PIO. I'm wondering lang kung is there any more room for hope in the actual decision, barring a complete change of minds kung mag-MR. I mean, compared lang dun sa nilabas ng PIO na 2 amendments or two provisions struck down.
Well, would like to believe and we trust that the summary given by the PIO is accurate. So yung mga pagtatalakay dun sa mga malalaking puntos na bringing up ng mga petitioners, ay gagawin yan, but the vote is not in our favor. So yung discussing it is not enough. It's really changing the votes.
The vote talaga.
Other one, of course, is it depends also to an extent reaction ng mamamayan at mga stakeholders dito sa decision na ito.
So, Attorney, you're indicating that you might wait for a change of administration kasi si President Duterte pa rin yung mag-a-appoint niyong susunod na magre-retire, di ba?
But not necessarily change in administration. You know, there'll be that's the reality. There'll be new faces in the Supreme Court, but we're not banking on that.
Yes.
At the end of the day, regardless of who they are, who appointed them, would like to believe that they will decide based on the arguments, the merits of the arguments, and what the Constitution in letter and in spirit says.
Yung vote is 12-3 Medyo mataas yun, ano? And the endorsers, especially in the Senate, they passed it after all, no? They are saying it's a victory for peace and the defeat of terrorists. Masisway kaya kayo if you see the arguments presented by the justices?
Well, you know, when you say it is for peace, who can quarrel against peace, di ba? Sa amin ho naman, it's just the constitutionality of these provisions. And you know, you don't need to be an expert in constitutional law to see some of these glaring conflicts with the basic law of the land. But we will wait and see how the majority opinion treated these arguments and these provisions of the Supreme Court and the question law. So, titignan ho natin yung mga kanilang reasoning.
In the same way that not the entire law was struck down as unconstitutional, in fact, only a minority of its provisions. When we talk about Section 4 itself, it was not also Section 4, which defines terrorism, that was completely also struck down. It was just parts of Section 4. But how vital were those parts? Because definition obviously is foundational to the entire law. Were these parts foundational as well, or potentially foundational or not, to Section 4?
Well, you're correct. Very important yung struck down provision. It's actually a qualifier to a provision in the law. But to our mind, and we welcome that, make no mistake about it, we welcome that because it upholds the freedom of expression. Kayo na rin sa media, you should be very happy with that because tinanggal yung qualifier na yan. So at least we get some protection from the Supreme Court on that aspect.
Pero sir, how does that actually, kasi it reads more like a qualifier to a qualifier eh. A double qualifier, di ba?
That's correct.
So with that qualifier to the qualifier out already, how does the definition read now? In layman's terms, ano ba yung pasok ngayon sa terorismo kung ngayon tinanggal na yung qualifier to the qualifier?
Well, marami pa rin sa nakalagay sa batas. Karamihan pasok pa rin, no, sa definition nila, no, yung any act, basta ito lang kasi nag-focus dun sa yung expression, public expression, mga
Dissent,
rally,
mass protests.
Yes, kasi nakalagay doon na hindi yan daw yung freedom of expression, ay kayo sa media, yung nagrarally, okay lang yan. as long as there is no intent to harm or to cause harm on the part of the speakers or the rallies, yung intention nasa utak at saka sa puso Paano mo malalaman yan? So, if when you start punishing the intention, then you give too much power to the law enforcer.
Yes, sir. Pero, sir,
Yan, tinanggal ng Supreme Court yan. So, regardless of your intention, kasi hindi mo naman malalaman, makikita talaga kung may intention, kung mag-express ka ng iyong paningin sa gobyerno, kontrahin mo man yan, batikusin mo man yan, that cannot be a terroristic act.
I'm trying to recall some of the things that we talked about before, but it really still turns on that, on intent. We talked to a lot of lawyers saying it doesn't even turn on act. It doesn't even turn on what is actually done. Everything is pivoted on ano bang binalak mo or ano bang gusto mong gawin.
Yun nga ang problema, Robbie. When the law starts authorizing the executive branch, the law enforcer, to act on what he thinks the actor or the suspect is intending, then you give him too much power. Kung kaaway ka niyan, ang sasabihin, halimbawa, ikaw ay humaharurot sa tricycle mo at nakabangga ka at natakot yung buong barangay. Kung sa tingin niya, kaaway ka niya, terroristic act na yan at pwede kanyang huliin, i-detain na walang charges. Hindi ba sobrang kapangyarihan na yan sa mga law enforcers? Kasi nga, nag-iiba yung perception nila ng intention depende sa circumstances.
Pero sir, yes sir. Pero sir, reading Section 4 pa rin, now that it's amended by the Supreme Court, reading Section 4 pa rin, just about half of Section 4 is still about intent. Especially the part where when the purpose of such act, by its nature of context, is to intimidate the public, create an atmosphere, spread the message of fear, provoke, influence the government, it's all intent. So it's still there.
Precisely. So it's surprising bakit yung rallies at mga dissent lang ang sinabing unconstitutional kasi intent daw yan. But hindi na lang nila linahat yung mga provision na ang tinutukoy intention.
Yun naman ang sinasabi ng mga defender, sabi nila, it's counter-terrorism. You are trying to stop an act. Kaya daw nga intent. But anyway, that will be a ruling of the Supreme Court na kung mag-EMR kayo. Kung sakasakali maging final yon, there's another option pa rin, you amend the law. Are you also considering this na maglalabi kayo with lawmakers to amend at least certain provisions or at least repeal it completely?
That's one avenue, no? Yung pagpupunta sa Supreme Court, that's turning to the judicial branch of government, which normally should be protective of the Constitution. Ngayon, kung hindi naman umubra yan, o sa tingin nila tama naman ng gobyerno, maaari din naming dalhin uli sa bagong Kongreso para i-improve yung batas. So, hope springs eternal. There'll be a new Congress. We don't know if there'll be any changes in the composition, but that's certainly one avenue.
Well, we're approaching elections. You think it will be an election issue?
Possibly, but if you look at it, it should be an election issue if it is clearly framed and properly framed. Pero propaganda na kasi ang sinasabi, lahat ng mga nagka-question nito, terrorist kasi. Aba, yung mga madre, yung mga pare, mga abogado, IBP, hindi naman kami terorista, but pinapangalagaan lang natin yung ating mga karapatang pantao at saka yung bigay halaga sa ating mga konstitusyon, yung checks and balances, due process, and well-established principles in constitutional law and jurisprudence of the Supreme Court. So,
since it's a constitutional question, since there are several constitutional questions, kung sakasakaling tuloy-tuloy yung implementation, di ba? And there's a case that comes up, merong inaresto, terror suspect, you can still bring it up to the courts, di ba, and challenge the legality of that arrest and detention.
You're correct there, Ami. As a matter of fact, when we filed this, wala sa amin na aresto. We were filing it as taxpayers, concerned individuals, and for IBP, because we are mentioned in the law. We're supposed to participate in defending, but how can we be defending somebody being charged in a law that we find unconstitutional. So that gave us standing. But you're correct. Anyone who will be charged or arrested without warrant and detained for up to 24 days, anyone who's aggrieved can actually continue raising the constitutional. And I hope they do, so that the Supreme Court will be given a fresh opportunity to perhaps look at the issues deeper and hopefully reconsider.
Ay, to that point, gaya nga po ng sinabi nyo, lumalakad na naman talaga yung batas na yan. Meron naman talagang mga kaso as a result of that. But given itong decision ng Supreme Court, what changes, if anything, starting tomorrow?
Well, just those two provisions, like the government cannot rely or grant the request of a foreign jurisdiction for designation simply because it complies with the UN definition. Secondly, pagdating sa mga rallies, mga dissent, mga criticisms, you can do that without any fear of being designated or suspected or arrested as a terrorist, regardless of your intention.
Sir, well, one of the arguments made by proponents of this law is that it's supposed to be laxer now than other laws in other parts of the region and other parts of the world. One example that's been cited is the case of Malaysia. Malaysia has the Prevention of Terrorist Acts, or POTA, so, which allows for 60 days of detention before you are brought before a judge. And that can even be extended by the POTB, the Prevention of Terrorism Bureau or Board, which can extend it to 2 years. So that, among other things, has been used as an argument to say na bakit, what's wrong with 24 days?
Well, which is a wrong argument, Ed, and for everyone. Because number one, they're quoting out of context. No? Okay lang naman yung extended detention, basta ang magdi-determine whether or not there is allowable detention is a neutral branch of government, like the judiciary, not the executive branch. Kasi sila yung implementer, sila yung nag-aaresta. So walang checks and balances. Secondly, anyone who makes that argument fails to appreciate the historical differences, the democratic principles and the democratic traditions of the different countries. Siyempre, kung ang titignan mo, yung mga bansa na sanay dun sa mga autocratic at yung mahigpit na pamahalaan at binibigyan ng so much leeway ang gobyerno, parang malabnaw yung sa ating sa Pilipinas. The other one also is, tignan natin ang history ng mga ito. Ang experience sa gobyerno, walang masyadong abuso Sa atin kasi, sangkatutag yung abuso. Nanggaling na tayo sa martial law, nanggaling tayo sa mga kalokohan ng mga law enforcers. Hindi naman sa lahat, pero too much, no? Yung nakikita natin. So, siyempre, nangangamba tayo. Kasi kung matino naman ang gobyerno, di ang ating history matino, walang abuso sa gobyerno, walang abuso sa law enforcers, tiwala tayo. We don't have to worry about these things. Unfortunately, we have had sad experiences with government and the law enforcers. Kaya naman, doble ang ating vigilance. At we raise constitutional issues as soon as possible para sa ganun sana, mabawas-bawasan ang mga incidents and opportunities for abuse.
Attorney, balikan ko lang yung point about the facial challenge and the as-applied challenges. In practice, how much more, well, it's not fortunate, but how much more practicable or easier is it to apply, as applied challenges? We are anticipating a lot of more arrests probably as a result of this Supreme Court decision. government can take it as, we're more unfettered now. We're free to apply it as we understand it. But once those cases are there and people are starting to get arrested or designated as terrorists for various reasons, in practice, how different will those kinds of challenges be versus the facial challenge that you mounted?
Well, of course, if there's an actual controversy, somebody is already aggrieved, somebody is already arrested by virtue of this law, then pwede niyang i-raise yung mga constitutional issues. Hindi kagaya namin noon na theoretical at nangangamba din ang mga petitioners noon na ite-technical lang yan. Sabi, wala kayong standing lahat. Maraming salamat naman sa hindi ginawa yan. So pinagbigyan naman to rule on the merits, except that of course, very limited nga yung aming success. So it can happen. But that's the fear that lingers in our minds. People can get arrested, they will be detained for up to 24 days, and then later, hindi pala ito terrorist. You release. Sorry na lang, pasensya ka, nawalan ka ng liberty for 24 days. Your assets can also be frozen. Di ba? So, these are all the practical consequences. Pwedeng gawin yan. Maaring hindi abusuhin, pero pwedeng gawin yan. At ano ang remedy mo? Di ba? Very limited. You know, have you experienced being in jail or detained for a day? Ito, 24 days without any charge. Imagine the Philippine context.
Attorney, yung ibang concerns nyo, can they be addressed through implementing rules and guidelines? Like, for example, yung puro executive, members of the executive branch lang yung sa Anti-Terrorism Council. Can you include people from outside, from the church or from IBP?
Well, even if you include people from IBP, from the church, or any other sector, the fact is it's not a judicial agency. It's not part of the judiciary. And under the Constitution, ang nagdedetermine ng probable cause at nag-i-issue ng warrants of arrest, yung ating mga hukom and independent judiciary, not the legislative branch, not the executive branch. So kahit dagdagan mo pa yan ng NGO at kung sino-sino, it doesn't really correct the unconstitutionality to our mind. So, yung IRR naman, hindi rin pwedeng palitan yung batas. The IRR is only implementing rules. It cannot rise above the law that it is trying to implement.
Attorney CAYOSA, one final question. We of course cannot pass up noting the irony that tomorrow, December 10, is Human Rights Day. What does this decision signal to the Philippines with regards to the state of human rights in our country?
Well, it's very unfortunate. And if you note, of course, they were not petitioners, but many international organizations, including agencies of the United Nations, decried this law as violative of basic rights of the citizens. So hindi lang ho kami, yung iba pa. Okay? Pangalawa, of course, many, not only us, but abroad, view it with concern. You know, it can be, we're not saying it will be, but it can be prone to abuse, not only by the national leadership, but any, local executive, any law enforcer. That's the worry that we have. It's nothing political, nothing personal, but the possibility that it will be and it can be misused.
Okay. Maraming salamat po, Attorney CAYOSA.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Ingat po.
Attorney.
Ingat po kayo.
Maraming salamat. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
That was Attorney Egon CAYOSA, former President of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. We'll take a break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
back to the Chiefs on One News, and now with us is Dr. Lina GLORIANI, Chairperson of the Vaccine Expert Panel. Magandang gabi, Dr. GLORIANI, and thank you for coming back to us.
Yes, magandang gabi sa inyo, Robby
evening po.
and Ami, sino pa nandiyan?
Ed po.
Ed.
Yes, ma'am.
Wala si ano ngayon.
Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening po. Doc, well, the WHO nga says that mukhang mas infectious itong Omicron, pero it does not cause symptoms as serious as the other previous variants. How does this change, how does Omicron change our plans for vaccination and boostering?
Well, actually, we should ramp it even some more, no? Because any variant will actually derail this immunity. There will be some immune escape. And we do not know that for Omicron yet. Actually, there are parang medyo conflicting reports. Itong Pfizer was saying it's a press release, hindi siya technical picture, that a third dose will actually protect against the Omicron variant, similar to how it will protect against yung prototype na Wuhan strain. But there was another one that just came out just a few hours ago, I think, na the neutralizing antibodies were down from around 1,000 something, 300 titer, yung may GNT time tinatawag, to around 32. So that was one study in South Africa.
That
So,
sounds,
we're still waiting for additional data.
Ma'am, that sounds significant, but we're not sure. We're not sure if it is. What does that mean in layman's terms? Yung 1,000 naging 30.
1,000 plus to naging
Yun nga,
32.
yung dami, the number corresponds to the amount of antibodies. Kunwari, if we give a number to yung dami ng antibodies, let us say it's 1,000, yung antibodies that will neutralize the old strain, yung antibodies that will neutralize the Omicron is only about 32, so it's low.
So it's practically ineffective. Tama po ba?
Ang sabi nila, meron pa naman daw effect konti.
May
You will
32.
see the data. It's very difficult to judge from the press releases.
Meron pang isang report ngayon, ma'am, na kailangan daw yung interval between the second dose and the booster should be shortened to about 4 months. Are you studying that possibility as well?
Well, actually, there's some parang data from other vaccines that they tried 3 months interval from the second to third dose. May 6 months, may 8 months, may 10 months. Ano lang yan eh. So, actually, when we recommended yung 6 months for the general population, ito yung parang average na lang. But when you are considering or when you have to think of yung mga immunocompromised, you can give the booster earlier, actually.
What earlier? What's earlier? Is 3 months early enough?
Yes, mga 3 months. You do not have to wait for 6 months.
Is there such a thing as too early?
We also do not want to give the booster too early, meaning 1 month ago lang, yung ganon. Why? Because the antibodies will still be a little high. And when the antibodies are high, no amount of boosting will improve that further. Something like that. May saturation ng ating immune system.
So it doesn't extend your 6-month mark by a month. Walang ganun pa rin. You still count it by the second shot.
Yes, yeah.
Mas malakas ba yung immunity nung na-infect na dati, na vaccinate later? Yung combination ng vaccination and natural herd immunity, mas malakas ba immunity ng tao?
And when you have the natural immunity plus vaccine-induced immunity, we call that hybrid immunity, that's higher than either the natural or the But you do not want to get the infection.
Yeah.
Just to get hybrid immunity.
Pero recommended pa rin yung 6 months booster.
Yes, for all, especially with the Omicron variant, that threat. There is a threat, no? We know that.
Okay. Ma'am, we were talking kasi earlier this week with Father Nico Sriaco. Of course, he's not a doctor, he's a microbiologist. Well, among other things, he talked about the possibility of COVID-19 becoming endemic by hopefully summer, or if not summer, maybe Christmas next year. Of course, we've also heard various other opinions, some to the contrary of that as well. What about you, Po? What do you think? Is that a possibility, or is that is it still
Yes, a
far-fetched?
possibility. The way we are seeing the surges up and down, of course, in the Philippines, we do not know yet. We're just starting to watch itong mga incoming from abroad, no? So, sabi nga nila, it's a matter of time, pero we hope not that we will get the Omicron. But we're really looking at something like flu that we have to deal with maybe, I don't know, hopefully just a yearly
Yeah, a
boost.
seasonal problem. Ma'am, let me qualify that further. Are you saying it's a possibility or a probability?
Nako, words yan ng mga epidemiologists and statistics. I cannot be canon by probability and possibility. Baka possibility. Yung probability, mas may yun.
Mas parang sigurado yung probability eh.
Oo. May statistical considerations.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I'll throw in another word there. I mean, officials, and these are not scientists speaking, but officials are also saying, there's an inevitability and that we should also embrace. Darating at darating yan. It's a matter of when, not if. You take that statement on the one hand. On the other hand, we're into this for a couple of weeks already. Wala pa ring nakikitang Omicron case sa Philippines. Is that surprising, or is that more or less, are we more or less still within a reasonable window to say na hindi pa naman talaga natin expect ngayon yan?
Yes, maybe we're doing the right thing. We have ramped up our immunization coverage a lot, no? We're at 50% national immunization coverage as of December 8. Yun yung last ko na nakita na data, no? So, in the NCR alone, that's about 96% na. I mean, that's very high. And of course, we have to consider that not too many people are actually wearing yung mask properly and so on. But still, the immunization coverage is high enough to actually protect us.
Pagkatapos you mentioned those numbers, if the 3-day vaccination drive coming up in the middle of December is anything or even better than what we had in the first, that should push the numbers up by another 10%.
Yes, that's what we hope will happen.
Pero are you still encountering vaccine hesitancy anywhere in the country? Malakas pa rin ba in any particular area?
I think it's more do sa mga medyo malayo na areas. Maybe it's not really hesitancy. They do not really understand the importance or the benefits of these vaccines, or hindi sila talaga nare-reach. So we have to do more for them.
Kaya nga kasi sabi nung DILG, they actually encountered people who are worried that they will turn down into zombies.
Tagal na yun. Ang dami na sanang zombies ngayon, no? How many million? 92 million zombies, Filipino zombies.
Another perennial problem, I mean, certainly at the start, one problem was not only supply and access, but communication itself, as you pointed out. Do we still have communication problems when it comes to the third booster shot and the need for booster shots?
I think the Department of Health is actually doing its best to correct. Actually, meron kaming na-encounter na some communication problems with how the booster should be rolled out, or which boosters, pero naayos naman na yon. So it's really not easy, massive vaccination ito. The first time we ever did in millions, tens of millions.
But ang ano ko po is, obviously, supply remains an issue, but it's not as big an issue as as the first and second doses. Hesitancy also not that big of a problem now compared to when we started. But just in communicating to people that mukhang kailangan pa pala natin ng it took a lot of energy and emotion and effort just to convince people to take their first 2 doses. Itong third dose, I don't know, parang ano po ba yung mga tao, do they still have that sense of urgency, you feel?
We try to explain that the booster could help increase their protection, especially against the variant. So that is how I try to approach it now. because I know I have run out of explanations already. If they have the primary series, then that's fine. But those who are actually relatively vulnerable should get the booster as soon as possible.
What about pediatric vaccination? Kumusta na I know you're assessing kung pwede nang babaan yung age ng mga minors who are getting the jabs. In China, they're administering up to as young as 3 years old.
Yes,
Is that possible in our country?
We have 3 applications that are ongoing now. We're evaluating 3. So one is Pfizer for the 5 to 11-year-old age group. The other one is Sinovac for 3 to 17. And the other one is Covaxin for 12 to 17. So lahat sila ay under evaluation. It might take 1 or 2 weeks pa po.
1 or 2 weeks lang.
We have a timeline to actually dapat 2 weeks lang sa amin yung mga ganyang documents. But sometimes we have to ask them for more data, kaya nagbabalikan, kaya it takes a little longer.
So by the new year, malalaman na natin kung yung mga bata, very young children.
Yes, for as long as we approve. Kung hindi, we do not know. There are many things to consider. Foremost is safety. Kasi younger itong natin ngayon.
Ma'am, may isa pang nabanggit si Father Nico Striaco. Sabi niya, discussion sa mga chat groups where he belongs to. I suppose these are chat groups ng microbiologists, hindi chat groups ng mga Dominicano. But anyway, ang sabi niya kasi, with Omicron being apparently being more infectious but not as dangerous as the other variants, in some chat groups na pag-usapan nila is baka it may be to the advantage of populations for infections to occur with a variant that is not so dangerous, but that will also give them natural immunity, taking the place of the more dangerous variants. Of course, it's all theoretical, but
but we do not know that yet. Right now, ang nagkakaroon ng mga mild Omicron na infection are young, relatively young, and those who have been fully vaccinated, ito yung mga relatively healthy na travelers. Sila yung nare-report, no? We're not seeing yet yung talagang vulnerable na na-affect. For instance, the elderly, the immunocompromised. We have to see how they will react to this variant pa. It might take a few weeks.
Okay, so it's still too early.
This time.
Pero there's scientific basis for that. Kasi even businessmen are talking about it. Napapasukin na lang daw yung Omicron para magkaroon ng natural immunity ng karamihan sa atin kasi mild lang naman daw.
Sana mild.
So, ma-hospitalize. Parang yung details nung matagal ng panahon na pag nagka-measles yung isang bata, maghawa-hawa na lang yung pag-impinsa.
Yung party ng chicken pox, remember? Magpa-party yung mga bata.
So, is it possible na maging ganun nga yung coronavirus?
Medyo iba kasi ang pathogenesis yung the way they cause this you have to be more careful, so medyo mahirap.
Okay.
But I'm just curious on I don't know if you're following it on a regional level, but what's setting us apart right now from countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia? Vietnam is now at 14,000. Nung una talagang parang sila yung gold standard early in the game. What's happening in the rest of Southeast Asia?
Masunurin sila, parang dati, akala natin masunurin sila. Baka there are some lapses in their public health standards, yung mga ganon. Ako, I believe we have been doing naman, well, nung una, talagang we were grappling for yung possible solutions. Now, we still, up to now, we do not know much about the virus. But we learn from our lessons, nag-prepare tayo sa mga hospitals. I think we're tightening our border control. So tapos yung immunization talagang pinush natin despite the difficulty in negotiating for the supplies. So I think we're just reaping that. I don't know what they're actually doing. Baka meron silang breaches sa public health precautions.
What's the most encouraging thing for you, and what do you fear the most as we enter these 2 weeks into Christmas?
Ako yung immunization coverage talagang nag-i-increase. Maybe because I'm an advocate of vaccines. And I think people, I don't know, yung people are careful also now, although I'm not really so sure about other partners, no? Yung gathering, so kasi parang sabihin, oh, you all have to be fully vaccinated before you can have a party or before you can meet together. Parang mga gano'n. I think that's more parang being practiced now before. But that immunization coverage is really, siya yun talagang
Kayo ba po, nagpa-family gathering na po kayo? Or did you institute? Opo.
Nag-party na ako sa isang sa workplace. But there's only 10 of us, and you have to follow kasi the di ba, yung ilan yung capacity, nakamask kayo, tapos malalayo. Ako, I was in one table, yung mga ganon.
What about political gatherings? Nakikita natin ngayon yung political gatherings, and DILG is so worried. They're asking COMELEC to issue clear guidelines. Kayo, from the side of the healthcare workers, what do you think should be a reasonable guideline for political gatherings at the campaign?
Ako, sa akin talaga number one, you have to be fully vaccinated to even go out, no? To meet people who you know may not be vaccinated. Then you have to make sure na yung gathering is only a small number na yun nga, like I will be into another parang gathering later. Yung 900 capacity nila, only 250 will be attending. So that is even less than the 50%. And then high ceiling, plated, and everything. So ganon. So I don't know what you can do pag political rallies, no? And there are so many still. Although NCR, konti na lang yun yung hindi vaccinated.
Eh, yung outdoor gathering, kasi kapag outdoor, parang tingin nila okay lang kasi open Kahit magdikit-dikit sila, you think that's safe? Or
no. Because you do not know who you're next to, no? Kung masyadong dikit-dikit, you do not know that. Maybe you have to be really, really careful with your mask, tama talaga yung suot nyo, if you can have the N95, yung hindi yung medical lang. And then of course the shield. So para sa akin, I've never yung shield, hindi ko yung tinake away at any point na sinabi nila pwede na. No. When I'm outside, I wear it.
Doc, may ba ako ng konti? I don't know if this is still within your purview, pero I've noticed kasi on my Facebook page, ang dami ng mga nag-advertise ng yung mga for sale na antigen tests. That I suppose you can self-administer kasi mga kits Are these safe and are these recommended
I'm really sure if FDA is allowing self-administration of antigen tests. Alam ko dapat medyo may professional din yan, yung guidance, Then one thing about the variant, itong mga antigen tests may not pick them up. So merong silang, especially the Omicron variant, meron siyang S-antigen target failure. Hindi siya nakikita. So of course, some of the RT-PCR tests that are available now, iba-iba kasi yan, iba-ibang genes yung kanilang dinidetect. So yung iba na pick up pa. Pero pagka hindi na pick up nga, 3 genes are being detected and then nag-fail doon sa S gene, it is probably Omicron. Then they will have to do sequencing. So the antigen test will not detect that.
Ma'am, are you referring to all antigen tests not being able to pick up Omicron or just specific antigen tests?
Siyempre hindi naman natin nakita yung mga brands na yan, but I'm sure FDA will look up yung mga performance ng mga yan kasi may mga sensitivity, specificity, precision, accuracy, lahat
no, I'm talking about the ones that are approved by the FDA for administering to you by a professional. For example, yung mga clinics that are authorized by...
Yung sa clinics na lang siguro, pero hindi personal, hindi home kit. The way they're doing it, maybe in the US, meron silang mga home kits na So, I don't think that should be done here.
Sa testing pa rin, there's some concern na yung ibang tao daw, kapag mild lang, hindi na nagpapatesting.
Actually,
it's so expensive. Is that a valid concern? And how risky is that?
It is risky because they will be transmitting the infection if they have the virus. Hindi nila natetest. And mild or asymptomatic, some of these variants also cause asymptomatic infections. So walang nararamdaman. Exposure lang ang magsasabi sa inyo na maybe you should get tested.
Lalo na yung breakthrough infections, that's the problem kasi ang dami ng vaccinated. Hindi magkakaroon ka ng mild cold, hindi ka na magpapatesting. Is that a valid concern? Kasi meron din mga ganyan na concerns ngayon na kumakalat.
So right now, but maybe the antigen test will be cheaper, no? Pero it has to be done by somebody who knows to administer it.
Doctora, of course, everybody will welcome if it's cheaper. The other thing that they will welcome, nandun na po tayo sa ideally hindi self-administered. But is there a better way for us to have more ubiquity in where I can get these tests? Kasi parang sa ngayon, parang ang hirap-hirap. Magpapatest ka lang antigen, di ba? Bukod sa mahal, there are still only really designated places. I think kung kanto-kanto merong testing, I don't think people will mind. Kahit hindi ano. But is there a way na that this can be that can be implemented, that people have more access and more convenience in getting these tests?
Maybe it's FDA and the DOH, we should think of ways to actually make it more accessible and that it is properly done. Kasi yun naman ang worry natin. Not anybody can actually do it and interpret it.
Yeah.
At ang interpretation yan also, meron niyang correlation sa signs and symptoms, yung mga ganun eh.
Yeah.
Okay, because I asked because I have friends from other countries as we all do, and we all compare notes, and yung iba sinasabi, sa butika lang, we walk into and then there was a time I was thinking, nga, yung butika, I never thought of it as part of the developed ecosystem for responding to COVID. I mean, sa totoo lang, yung butika was just for me one step above a convenience store. Di ba parang pwede ako bumili ng gamot, pwede rin ako bumili ng snacks at saka soft drinks ko. But as part of the infrastructure for dealing with COVID in terms of testing and contact tracing, it was never for me, to my mind, a frontline for these things.
Parang di ba, ang pregnancy test, you can do it na at home. Dati hindi. Pero ngayon you can. But maybe with the antigen test, there's still a lot to parang ito-control mo pa how they actually use it. Kasi iba-iba rin yung mga performance nito. So, I think it's up to FDA or DOH to think of that.
Ang laki kasi ng price difference eh. I was just computing a while ago eh. The cheapest antigen test I found that you can get from a clinic that is authorized is mga 950 thereabouts or 1,000. But yung mga binibenta ngayon sa social media, pumapatak na mga more than 100 per.
That's assuming na legit.
Well, assuming legit.
Saka hindi legit yun. Pag 100 yun, ano na lang yung fly-by-night na lang.
No, kasi it's for every kit of 25 tests eh. They sell it in those
Pag online, you have to be careful.
But to your
I'm not
point,
endorsing anything. I'm just saying that's a big difference.
But to your point, Dr. Nina, I get the impression that there's a balance to be struck. On the one hand, we're not saying madalito. There are technical things that have to be handled by technical people. On the other hand, I get the impression that there are some regulatory red tape and bureaucratic matters. I see you smiling and nodding at the same time. Can there be, is there some balance that can be recalibrated there?
I'm sure there will be some, no? Kaya lang dito sa Philippines, medyo mahirap eh. Ang daming lumalabag talaga. Yung online, I bought something from online, iba pinadala sa akin, galit na galit ako eh. It was so different and walang reply. So imagine niyo itong mga test kits na ito, never mind.
Kayo ba pinadala na?
Ito kasi si Ed, lahat binibili sa Lazada, kaya ganyan.
Hindi ko naman sinabi sa Lazada makikita yung ano.
Hindi siya Lazada, mas madali siguro ireklamo Lazada. Hindi siya Lazada.
At least yung Lazada is an organized network eh. Kung makita mo lang sa Facebook, mas delikado yun, di ba?
Sa Lazada pala siya bumili.
Hindi.
Okay. Well, sige, bueno. Dr. Nina Gloriani, she's chair of the Vaccine Expert Panel. Maraming salamat po, Dr. Gloriani.
Ingat, Doc.
You take care also.
Salamat po. That's all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, stay safe. Philippines, I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ani Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Ed Lingao, and we are One News.